accept the words of your Son.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "There was a rich man, and he had a steward who was denounced to him for being wasteful with his property. He called for the man and said, 'What is this I hear about you? Draw me up an account of your stewardship, because you are not to be my steward any longer.' Then the steward said to himself, 'Now that my master is taking the stewardship from me, what am I to do? Dig? I am not strong enough. Go begging? I should be too ashamed. I know what I will do to make sure that when I am dismissed from office, there will be some to welcome me into their homes.' Then he called his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, 'How much do you owe my master?' 100 measures of oil,' was the reply. The steward said, 'Here, take your bond, sit down straight away, and write 50. To another he said, 'And you, sir, how much do you owe?' 100 measures of wheat,' was the reply. The steward said, 'Here, take your bond, and write 80. The master praised the dishonest steward for his astuteness. For the children of this world are more astute in dealing with their own kind than are the children of light. And so I tell you this, use money, tainted as it is, to win you friends, and thus make sure that when it fails you, they will welcome you into the tents of eternity. The man who can be trusted in little things can be trusted in great. The man who is dishonest in little things will be dishonest in great. If then you cannot be trusted with money, that tainted thing, who will trust you with genuine riches? And if you cannot be trusted with what is yours, who will give you what is your very own? No servant can be the slave of two masters. He will either hate the first and love the second, or treat the first with respect and the second with scorn. You cannot be the slave both of God and of money." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The love of money is the root of all evil sermons. You know, your heart sinks when we get up and talk about money. You kind of go on defensive mode and the ears get turned off because we don't want to talk about money. Because deep down you know that whenever your priest gets up and talks about money, basically what he's saying is, you need to give me more of it. And you kind of think, no, we don't want to go there. You know, we don't like talking about money. And we especially don't want to talk about money in church. You know, money's for outside, not for inside. You hate to hear it, and we hate to talk about it. Because anytime we talk about money, what happens is people go out and say, do you know him? Father David never talks about anything else but money. He wants more of it all the time. You know, and in my defense, I'm going to have to talk about money because Jesus talked about it in the gospel today. But we're not comfortable about talking about money. You know, I was thinking about this the other day, and there's a kind of delight in each of us, if we're honest, about the BBC's policy of publishing the salary of its top presenters. We kind of like to know, what do they get for that? And you think to yourself, I could do a better job for less money. But we don't like talking about our income. I mean, imagine if I were to ask you now to turn to the person that you turned to at the start of Mass and tell them what your monthly income was. I don't think many of you would do it. We don't like to talk about money. But here's the thing. Jesus has got a lot to say about money. He talks about money a lot. Did you know that 1 in every 3 parables that Jesus tells us is about money? So money for Jesus is an important part of the spiritual life. Why? Well, that's a kind of obvious answer. We all need money. We all use money. A lot of us think about money a lot of the time. A lot of us spend huge parts of our life working for money. So that's why Jesus has got something to say about money. And in the gospel today, he uses a parable that really, when you think about it, is quite shocking. You know, we hear about the steward, and the master praises the steward, and Jesus praises the steward. But let's be honest, the steward was a crook. He was on the take. So why is Jesus holding this figure up to us as something to learn from? And really what is happening here is that Jesus is giving us a good message from a bad example. You know, Jesus realizes that this is the way of the world. Jesus says, you know, he's observing the way things are really done in the world. Our first reading today, the prophet Amos, you know, he talked about what people really do. They want the Sabbath to be over so they can get on with wheeling and dealing and doing what you have to do. You know, and there's something about that in us, you know, that we have an ideal vision of what the kingdom of God looks like when we're in here. But when we're out there, well, a lot of the values of the world we take on board. And it's true when it comes to money. You know, basically what's happening here is the steward is working a principle of self-preservation. You know, the steward himself is basically a manager. He's managing the master's money and property. That's his job. And we know that the master was rich. You know, there's a couple of indicators in Luke's gospel that let us know that the master was not just rich, but extremely rich. First of all, he had a whole lot of debtors. So he had enough money in the first place to give out loans. And obviously in time, he calls in the loans. So we know he's rich. And we know he's rich because he doesn't get his hands dirty with the business. He hires somebody else to look after the day-to-day running of the business, the steward, the manager. And the steward is denounced to the master for being wasteful with his property. It's quite interesting. If you remember last week in our gospel, we heard the parable of the prodigal son. And one of the accusations made against the son was that he was wasteful of the father's property. You know, it's the same word that Luke uses in the gospel today, that the man was wasteful. And so the master says, draw up an account of your stewardship because you're fired. I want to know what you've been doing, but you're out of here. And the steward's thinking to himself, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And he actually says, you know, what am I going to do? Dig? I'm not strong enough. You know, he's kidding himself on. Anybody can dig. All you need is a shovel. You know, it's not that he can't dig, it's that he won't dig. His pride is too much for him to debase himself by digging. And then he says, go begging. I'd be too ashamed. Now, isn't that ironic? He's ashamed to go begging, but he's not ashamed to steal. You know, there's something weird going on here. So what he does is he thinks to himself, what do I need to do to make sure that in the future I'm okay, that I can get out of this problem in the future, that I'll not be left destitute? And so what he does is he's very, very clever here. He calls in the debtors, we're told, one by one. And then the next thing he does is he asks them how much they owe the master, and then he says, you write a new total in your deed. You lower the amount that you owe the master. So he actually gets them to commit the crime. You know, he's smart, he's astute, he hasn't done anything really. You know, and what he's doing is he's preparing his future. And in doing this, he does two things to the debtors. They will be grateful. So later on, when he's fired, he'll be able to go back to them and say, hey, didn't I not help you? It's time for payback. You need to look after me now. You owe me. And then the second thing he does is he makes them accomplices. So if you don't help me, if you don't look after me, guess what? I'm going to the authorities. He's got them. He's indebted them to him. And so they have to help him. And then we get the reaction of the master when he sees this happening. You know, the master's a victim here. He's a victim of crime. And what does he do? We are told he commends the steward for his astuteness. Seriously? He commends him for his astuteness. Now, I don't know about you, but if someone was stealing my property, I would want them to pay the price. You know, that's what we do when someone kind of attacks us. We want to attack back. We want to get revenge. We want this fixed. It reminds me of a story of a number of years ago now, where in a parish that I was in, there was this woman in the parish, and she was a lovely woman. She was so kind. She was so gentle. She spoke very, very softly. And everyone thought really, really highly of her. She just was a really lovely person. And she was quite a quiet person, you know. She did a lot of good work, but not noisily. She didn't take a lot of credit. She was just a really nice person. And there was a group of us one day going to another parish, I can't remember what for, but she offered to drive us. So we all get in the car, and there was 3 of us and her driving, and she started driving off. And after about 5 minutes, we're driving along, and a car came at our side, cut her off. And then the amazing thing happened. Her hand went on the horn and wasn't coming off the horn. The window got rolled down, and she started gesturing out the window. Our eyes were like saucers. This lovely wee woman who was so kind and gentle turned into some kind of monster. You know, she had the good grace to be embarrassed. But you know, it says something that's kind of inbuilt on us. You know, when someone cuts us up, we react. So when the master didn't react in the way that we thought, then there's something going on here. So what is it that Jesus is trying to teach us? He's not teaching us that the steward should be commended for being a crook. That's not what he's doing. He's commending the steward to us for his foresight, that the steward was looking ahead to where he would be, and he was preparing the ground so that he would be okay. He was making sure that after he was fired, he would have something to lean on. And what Jesus, in a sense, is teaching us is this: if believers were as determined in their spiritual lives and their spiritual future as unbelievers are in their physical lives, well, things would be a lot different. If we put the same effort into making sure that we were prepared for heaven than we do, for example, our retirement, what would the world look like? And that's really what Jesus is saying. We need to prepare ourselves for heaven. And then in the gospel we hear Jesus says, "And I tell you this, use money, tainted as it is, to win you friends, and thus make sure that when it fails you, they will welcome you into the tents of eternity." Jesus is telling us to use our money wisely. You know, people often say, I may as well spend my money because, you know, when I die, I can't take it with me. Well, that's true. You can't take your physical stuff with you. But you can take the fruits of how you use your money with you. How you use your money is important. Do you use it in such a way so that you will be welcomed into heaven by those who benefit from the way that you used your money? Do you use your money for good, to build up God's kingdom, to prepare a place in heaven? Now, let me be very precise here. You can't buy your way into heaven. I'm not suggesting that. St. Paul, in our second reading today, tells us that Jesus paid the price of our sin. He has won salvation for us. But we have to live that salvation. You know, we have to embrace it. We have to accept that gift because he doesn't force it on us. And so one of the ways that we express our acceptance of God's will is how we use our wealth. What do we use it for? You know, some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, I don't really have much to give anyway. I don't have a lot of spare cash. I'm at my limits at the moment, so I don't think I could give any more to God's work. And maybe if I won the lottery, right? If I win the lottery, sure, I'll be generous. I'll give to God's work. And you know what? The reality is, if you don't do it now when you've got little to give, you won't do it even if you win the lottery. Jesus flags that up to us. He says, the man who can be trusted in little things can be trusted in great. And conversely, the man who is dishonest in little things will be dishonest in great. This is not about how much wealth you have. This is about what kind of person are you? Do you prioritize his want over and above your want? That's the fundamental question here. And that's why Jesus finishes this by saying you can't have two masters. And so the question is, who is the master of your life? Is it your money? Is it your possessions? Is it your job? Is it your ambitions? Or is it God?